Hi, everyone. The League of Women Voters of Illinois is thrilled to welcome you to Issues Briefing 2022. My name is Allison Hout, and it is my honor to serve as the president of the League of Women Voters of Illinois. At the core of the mission goals of the League of Women Voters of Illinois are civic engagement and education. Our annual Issues Briefing is a point in time where we gather to seek information and understanding, to educate ourselves and each other, and use that information as the basis for generating civic engagement, advocacy for change, and voting. Issues Briefing is also a doorway. It's a doorway to opportunity. Together, we are readying ourselves to engage in our communities, to listen for understanding, to collaborate, to educate, and to activate others. So think about that. This is an opportunity. Something is going to happen going forward from this hour and 15 minutes. Because what we know about civic engagement and education is this: people who have information, people who are engaged, those people are more likely to be voters. And that voice that is each of our votes must be heard, because ultimately that's where all of our strengths lies, in the vote. So I'm asking you today to make a commitment. Make the commitment to go beyond expanding your own knowledge. Commit today to engage, educate, and activate others. Let's see more people using their voice and their vote to speak up about what matters most to them. Today, as we learn about ranked choice voting, I urge you to listen actively, ask questions, and then take what you learn today about ranked choice voting into your community, to your family, to your friends, to your neighbors, and to your local League of Women Voters. Before we begin, let me remind you that our meeting today is being recorded. Subtitles have been enabled. If you would like to activate, enlarge, or end the subtitles, use the button in the bar at the bottom of your screen. Toward the end of the session, we will have a Q&A period. During the session, please put your questions directly into the chat, and you can direct those questions to the name that you see, Question Asker. League members will pose the questions to the speakers at the end of our session. And then finally, we're going to try something new today. At the conclusion of the program, audience, you are invited to stay, if you wish, for an extra 10 minutes of informal discussion. More on how that will work at the end of our session. So please welcome with me our American Sign Language interpreters for today, Molly Burke and Sheila Kettering. And thank you to the League of Women Voters of Illinois Board of Directors, to the entire League of Women Voters of Illinois Issues and Advocacy Committee, and everyone who had a part in putting together this fantastic week of education, activation, and I hope new commitments. Now, Jean Pierce, co-chair of our Issues and Advocacy Committee, will introduce our speakers. Thank you, Jean.
Helps to be unmuted. Good afternoon. Welcome to the LWVIL Issues Briefing Session addressing ranked choice voting, prospects and barriers in Illinois, with guest panelists, State Senator Laura Murphy, who may be represented by her assistant, Sam Stogstill, Andrew Szilva from Fair Vote, Illinois, and Melissa Hall and Chris Hughes from the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. We'll begin with a brief overview of ranked choice voting presented by Mr. Szilva, who is the Executive Director of Fair Vote, Illinois.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm going to give a really brief overview of how ranked choice voting works, just to kick this all off. Yep. So with ranked choice voting, rather than selecting a single candidate, you rank your choices. First choice, second choice, third choice, as many or as few as you like, all the way down the list. So in this example, I have a ballot on the right-hand side of the screen. My first choice, I voted for Sylvester Cat. Second choice was Bugs Bunny. Third choice of mine was Wile E. Coyote. Fourth choice, Daffy Duck. And, you know, I didn't even bother voting for Roadrunner. I personally think Roadrunner is a jerk. I don't want to have anything to do with them. So I left them off the ballot, which is fine. You could do that. You can rank as many or as few as you like. And then when we count the votes, we only look at everyone's first choice. So we only look at the first place, first choice votes. And we sum the results. If someone has more than 50% at this point, the election's over. We have a winner. However, if nobody has more than 50%, we have an instant runoff. We would eliminate the candidate that has the fewest votes, and anyone who voted for that candidate as their first choice, they would have their vote go to their second choice instead. So in this case, it's Wile E. Coyote has the fewest votes. So he's eliminated, and anyone who voted for him has their vote go to their second choice. And then we look again. We say, does anyone have 50% or more? If so, the election's over. In this case, no one does. So we repeat that process. We again eliminate the candidate with the fewest votes. This time it's Sylvester the cat. And we reallocate votes to those voters' next choice. And finally, we still don't have 50%. So we eliminate Roadrunner. And then we finally have a winner. In this case, Bugs Bunny wins, right? So in a nutshell, that's how ranked choice voting works. From the voter's perspective, you just rank your choices, first choice, second choice, in order of preference. In order to win, a candidate needs more than 50% of the vote. And when we look at the first choice votes, if no one has 50%, we would eliminate the last place candidate and move anyone who voted for that candidate to their second choice. And then we'll repeat that process until we have a winner. So in a nutshell, that's it. And I'll turn it back over to Jean.
Okay, thanks very much. So let's see, I believe I apologize for my brain glitch. Okay, yes, it is time to hear from Senator Laura Murphy, who has joined us and has proposed a bill in the General Assembly this term. And Senator Murphy, we welcome you.
Well, thank you. And thank you all for being on this call. I appreciate having an opportunity to spend a few minutes with you. I'm on the Senate floor right now. Unfortunately, I wish we were calling ranked choice voting, but it's not quite there yet. So I introduced this bill last session, and because it was brought to me by a constituent in my district that was really interested in this program. After seeing a PBS special and watching some other states that I'm sure you, I came out a little late, but I'm sure that you went through all the states that used ranked choice voting. And the idea is that ranked choice voting, I think, will increase participation in the election cycle. And the greater the participation, the greater, I think, the better the outcome for everyone. So that's what intrigued me about the whole process. Now, it's not a new concept to the General Assembly in Springfield. President Harmon also introduced this legislation years ago, but it was perhaps a little ahead of its time. But now that he's the president, he still values the importance of ranked choice voting. And we will have a subject matter hearing on ranked choice voting before we adjourn on April 8th this year. I don't know exactly the date, but it will be before we adjourn April 8th. So that gives you somewhat an idea of the time frame of what's going here. And then I've also been approached by other organizations that are really in support of this. There's some national organizations that are moving across the states that also agree that this will definitely increase participation amongst voters. And that's what's their interest. They also feel that a ranked choice voting system will help shore up and maintain the two-party system and make sure that people have choice in their voting. So that's what is energizing them to work forward and to ensure that this gets heard in state legislators throughout the country. So the more we talk about it, the more we're able to educate my colleagues and the public about how this will really re-engage a lot of people, because we have elections time and time again that people that don't even have 50% and they win the election, and then they say that they have a mandate. Well, clearly, if you haven't even reached the 50% threshold, there's no mandate there. But this will ensure that that does occur. So I'm just happy to spend a few minutes with you. I can entertain a few questions if you'd like, or just listen for a few minutes to the rest of the presentation.
Well, I would hope that you could tell us a little bit about what is in your bill. And I understand it may be amended. So what's in the latest version of your bill, please?
Well, a number of advocates have looked at the Illinois bill and said that our bill is the most comprehensive and the most workable bill that they've seen in any legislature across the state. And they're going to use this as the model, because exactly what your presentation showed, it would provide for that type of ranked choice voting in our elections. Now, I think that I'm going to work with the mayor of Evanston, who is very interested in that, and we can try and pilot that at a local level. We provide a phase in so that election authorities can prepare the equipment that they need, the trainings that they need for people. We provide all of that in the legislation. So it is a comprehensive piece of legislation that everything you heard about ranked choice voting, the legislation supports the elements that are needed in that.
Thank you. I'm very happy to hear about the phase-in part particular. So Fair Vote Illinois has been instrumental in tracking and coordinating support for ranked choice voting in the state. And now Andrew Szilva will describe support for the measure.
Okay, thanks again. So yeah, Fair Vote Illinois is a one-issue organization. We focus on ranked choice voting, and that's it. And by being so focused on one issue, it allows us to be strategic and not get distracted and really try to make a change. So what I'm going to show is a little bit about what's going on around the rest of the country with ranked choice voting. And then I'll talk briefly about what's going on in the state of Illinois. And so what's really exciting is when people ask us, why ranked choice voting? Of all the issues, you're a one issue organization, why that? We always tend to say, well, there's just so many benefits. There's so many benefits and so few, if any, real drawbacks. It does provide for a majority winner, ensures that whoever gets elected has, at least in part, support of a majority. It allows for more choices. It allows for positive campaigning and avoids spoiler effect and splitting votes. It even potentially saves more money. And so with this, we're not the only ones who see this. Other parts of the country are saying, yes, this sounds like a great idea. And with that, we're really seeing an explosion of ranked choice voting around the country. So there are 2 states that passed it statewide. Maine passed it in 2006. Alaska passed it in 2020. They're going to be using it this year. It's used for overseas and military voting in some of the southern states. It was used in 2020 in some of the Democratic presidential primaries in 5 states. And where we're really seeing the explosion is at the city level. So there are over 50 cities now that use ranked choice voting. And there's some really big cities in here. Oakland, San Francisco, Minneapolis, Austin, Texas, New York City. So the biggest city in the country uses ranked choice voting. And we're going to talk more about that as well, because we have lots of results from that election. Now, what this really allows us to do is look at the data and say, are all those benefits coming to fruition? Are we seeing what we're hoping for with ranked choice voting? And so these are common questions we get. One we get, is it easy? Do voters understand it? Another one we get often is it leading to more choices, or is it leading to really better representation? Are we getting elected officials who who look like the voters, at least ideologically, and how they're getting elected. Are campaigns more positive? Are they more civil? I mean, we're living in a really nasty time of politics. Are we seeing some civility brought to elections? And are voters happier? And there's lots of other benefits. So this is just a select few that we want to show today. So first, is it easy? And what we're seeing is, yes, voters understand ranked choice voting. And from a voter's perspective, this makes sense. You're simply ranking your choices. First choice, second choice, third choice. We all know how to rank things. I sometimes say my little nephews and nieces, they could tell me their favorite ice cream flavors, first choice, second choice, third choice. And that's what we're seeing. So in New York City, 95% of people polled said, yes, it was easy to rank the choices. What's really promising is we're seeing that it's consistent across different demographic groups. So we're seeing that really easy across the board. If we look in other cities, San Francisco first used ranked choice voting in 2004. They had 86% who said it was easy or that they understood ranked choice voting fairly well or perfectly well. In Minneapolis in 2009, the first time they used it, it was at 90%. And one of the key insights here is that I'm talking about the first time the city used ranked choice voting, and subsequent elections, those numbers, shoot through the roof. Everyone understands it. So we're seeing it's very easy for voters to use. It's really, really great feedback that we're getting from places that use it. Did it lead to more choices, more diversity? And again, the answer is yes. We are seeing that people run for office and voters feel empowered to vote for who they want, first choice, second choice, third choice, without worrying about throwing away a vote. So one example is what happened in New York City again. So I'm going to use New York City examples throughout this. Prior to last year, when they used ranked choice voting for the first time, women never held more than 18 seats on their 51 member city council. So that was the most ever. This past year and now, today, women hold a majority for the first time. They hold 31 seats of the 51 seats. So it's a very promising change. And we're seeing that across the board, right? As people use ranked choice voting, we're seeing better representation. So more women, more minorities, more people of color run for office, more women, more minorities, more people of color get elected. And it's really closing that gap where our elected officials appear to be closer in line with what the voters want. Next question was, are the campaigns more civil? And again, we're seeing yes, like there's it doesn't end everything. There's still negativity in politics. I don't know how to solve all of that. However, they're better. When asked in New York City about the tone of the election, a small majority did say, oh, it's about the same, right? But for those who said there was a difference, overwhelmingly they said it's more positive. And this makes sense. We see from former Minneapolis Mayor Betsy Hodges, she kind of got it right where she said, look, if as a candidate, if I can't be someone's first choice, I still want to be their second choice or their third choice. And so it's in my best interest. I'm incentivized to appeal to people beyond my base even, right? I want to appeal to everyone, and attacking other candidates does not serve me well. We're also seeing that joint campaigning even becomes a thing. So I'm going to really drive this home by sharing an ad that was launched. So there was an ad that was launched in Oakland. And since it's Women's History Month and we're on a League of Women Voters call, this one was with 3 women who decided to campaign together because they said, hey, we're not that much different. And we could be positive in this election cycle. And so let me see if I could get this to play. Oops, one moment.
Hi, I'm Pam Harris.
I'm Nayeli Maxon.
I'm Shane Tao.
We're running for Oakland City Council District 4.
For the past 16 years, this seat has been held by dynamic women.
We are 3 well-qualified candidates for City Council.
We are mothers, public servants, and community leaders.
Pam has 20 years of nonprofit finance experience. She can manage any budget.
Nayeli has worked in the District 4 office. She knows the district's issues inside and out.
Shane has worked for the City Council for 5 years. She has the experience to get results.
We're asking for your support on November 6th.
This is a ranked choice election. Vote for us 1, 2, or 3.
You can learn more about us on our websites.
Vote for positive leadership,
collaborative leadership,
Women's leadership.
So again, this is almost felt unreal the first time I saw an ad like this. It seems so out of step with what I'm used to in politics, but it makes sense, right? If candidates share common values and they say, hey, we're not all that much different, so vote for me number one and her number two, or vote for her number one and me number two. Either way, right? We're working towards the same problems. Finally, I want to address, were voters happier with the result? And again, yes, we're seeing voters like ranked choice voting. In New York City, 79% of people said they want to continue using ranked choice voting for the New York City elections. A majority of those voters also support expanding ranked choice voting to all US elections. And this is after using ranked choice voting just one time. And we're seeing similar things in other places that use ranked choice voting. In Maine, 60% or over 60% favor keep using it there. And there's lots of reasons for this. There's a true majority winner, voters say, and that's really, drives it. For some voters, it's that there's more choices. For other voters, they say, hey, it's more issues focused, and that leads to just more positive campaigning. And that's how it should be. And then for others, they say, you get to vote your true preferences, and you don't need to worry about spoiling elections or wasting votes. So lots of different reasons why voters like it. We see that voters do in fact like it. So in summary, again, for what we covered, the ranked choice voting was very easy for voters to use, and that's very promising. We are seeing more women, more minorities, more people of color run for office and get elected, which is also a big positive. Campaigns are more positive, and voters are really happy with the results. So I'm going to show just a quick slide. I don't know how much time I have on what we're doing, and I'll just talk over it, just a few bullet points in Illinois. So in Illinois, Laura Murphy's bill, SB 1785, would be, we think that's a home run. If that passed, that's great. It would bring ranked choice voting to state offices. The amendment applies to federal offices as well. What a huge win, right? So as Fair Vote Illinois, we talk to people about these bills. We're willing to support Laura Murphy in whatever way she needs us. Yes, so happy that she introduced the bill. At the same time, cities have the power to pass ranked choice voting on their own as long as they're a home rule municipality. Evanston is one of those cities where there's a big interest. The mayor, Daniel Biss, was a former state senator. He also introduced a ranked choice voting bill when he was a state senator. There's just a lot of support in Evanston. The people of Evanston seem to be very proud. They kind of want to be leading the effort in Illinois. There's interest in Chicago. In Chicago, one of the motivators, again, since there's so many different benefits, is that it could potentially save the city money. So if we decided not to have a runoff election, we could have one less election and save the city of Chicago a lot of money on that. And it just gives you the results you want. And then there's interest in Bloomington, Illinois, and elsewhere around the country as well. So we have these pockets of interest, and we help support that. We will help with legislation, sample ordinance we'll provide to the city council, and we help the voters to educate the voters and inform them on what we're finding. And that's really what Fair Vote Illinois is mainly about. We're building a movement. We're a grassroots organization. The main obstacle we find is that people haven't heard of it. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak here. I appreciate that everyone's on this call. This is really what it's all about. It's about learning what it's about, how it works, trying to poke holes in things. And I'm not trying to sell everything. We're just reporting what we're seeing, and we think it makes a ton of sense. And as we talk to people, that's overwhelmingly the response we get, that they say, yes, why are we not doing this already? It makes so much sense. And then the final bullet on here is a little bit of a lead into what Melissa and Chris are going to talk about. But Fair Vote Illinois, we don't want to just get things passed and then have it fall apart. We want real change. And so with that, we talk to county clerks, election officials, We want the education for ranked choice voting to be smooth so that when it gets implemented, voters do enjoy it and they do rank their choices appropriately and there is more engagement. We want the implementation to be correct so that county clerks can actually make sure they have the right equipment and they're not overwhelmed because they're very overworked in my opinion, so that they have support to actually get the implementation right. And with that, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over. And I think that's a nice little lead into what Chris and Melissa will talk about as far as what is the implementation at and what are the next steps for actually implementing it here in Illinois.
Thank you, Andrew. So now Melissa Hall is the Director of Education and Compliance for the center, the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, and Chris Hughes is the center's Policy Director and Counsel.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. All right, you guys should be looking at my slides. All right, so thank you for that. Like Jean said, I'm Melissa. I'm the Director of Education and Compliance at the Resource Center. The Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center provides resources for election administrators, policymakers, voters, candidates, and anyone else who's interested in learning about RCV. On our website, www.rcvresources.org, we have a lot of resources available for you to review and use, including best practices and real-world examples from RCV jurisdictions across the country. So just a note, when we say the word jurisdiction, we're referring to the division of election administration in a given state. Some states administer elections down to the county level, others down to the local level, and of course, others at the state level. So for Illinois, there are 108 total jurisdictions, election jurisdictions, and that consists of 102 counties and 6 independent cities. So with that kind of out of the way and kind of background, we're going to go ahead and move on to what we're going to cover today. So here we kind of have the agenda, and I'm going to talk a bit about how election administration and RCV interact, do a quick overview of Rcv Maps and the Illinois assessment, and then of course discuss the Illinois voting system updates since the assessment was released, and of course how you can use that information. So let's get started. So first off, I want to start by briefly explaining election administration. It is the acts and processes underlying the conduct of elections in the United States. It's the infrastructure of our democracy. So this is just a kind of quick introduction to the major questions that election administrators are probably thinking about when implementing RCV elections, especially for the first time. So how do RCV and election administration interact? You know, whenever we think and talk about ranked choice voting, it feels like it can change everything from our elections, you know, from top to bottom, like from how candidates campaign, like Andrew mentioned, to how, you know, people vote, to how votes get counted and the results are displayed. You know, there's so much of that process that RCV can impact. So it feels, you know, sometimes overwhelming to think about how does that, you know, apply to the administration infrastructure side of election. So we've seen that in practice, you know, a lot of it will change how voters interact with that process. It definitely changes how election administrators have to approach their jobs, but the major parts of election administration that RCV changes are voter education, ballot design, voting systems, and results reporting. And I'm going to go through each of these briefly. So voter education. So we know you all are experts about this, but I always like to start with defining it. So, you know, it's probably self-evident, but voter education is teaching voters about the election. And of course, it can mean a lot of different things. It could be making sure that voters know that there's an election coming up and what contests are going to be on their ballot. It's making sure voters know how to fill out their ballots correctly, you know, understand their elections, you know, how they're accounted and how the candidates win in these elections. So here on the screen is an example of a piece of voter education material from the city of Minneapolis. Now keep in mind, this is just one example. There's so many different ways that people have done RCV voter education because every jurisdiction combines their pre-existing practices with you know, RCV where they can. They don't have, you know, time or resources to do a whole new thing. So they're going to fit RCV into what they're doing and how they think about their votes with voter education already. So on the left side of the flyer, there's an example of what a RCV sample ballot looks like in Minneapolis, and it shows it properly filled out. And then of course, on the right side, there's a couple of examples of what not to do on the ballot. And at the bottom, it briefly explains how votes are counted. So in a lot of places, we've seen there's a much bigger focus, especially as election day gets closer, on marking the ballot correctly. However, you also want to make sure that voters understand how votes get counted. Also, there's a lot of ways to run a RCV campaign, but the big things that we've seen jurisdictions do are like sending out these kinds of flyers out to voters, making sure there's materials in polling places, and making sure ballot instructions are really clear on their ballot. And of course, sending out voter guides to everyone in their jurisdiction. So since we've covered voter education and I've mentioned RCV ballots, go ahead and look at ballot design. So on this slide are some best practices for RCV ballots from the Center for Civic Design. We worked with them on a project for RCV ballots, voter education, and results reporting best practices a few years ago, which can be found on our website. The Center for Civic Design found that with either of these kinds of ballots, voters will mark them correctly and will understand it, so long as you design it pretty close to these standards. Though in the real world, actually fitting RCV onto a ballot and making sure that your voting system can let you design a ballot in a clear way, that you can manage hundreds of different contests you may have in an election cycle, making sure that you've accounted for every factor on your ballot that's not just RCV can get really complicated. So there's a lot of thought and consideration and time that goes into designing an effective ballot, overall. And of course, we wanted you to know that there's RCV best practices available. So next up, we have voting systems, which are used to design ballots, among other things, and we'll kind of go over that briefly. So a voting system, is the thing that's used to program, design, and run an election. There's a lot going on in a voting system. It's the hardware that's in your polling place that captures votes. It's the thing you use to actually count votes and determine the results at the end of the day. It's a mixture of different computers, different software, different hardware, distributed all throughout an election jurisdiction. Just about every voting system in every jurisdiction, every city, every county, every state has a different voting system. It's the part of the decentralization that's so wonderful, but also so much of it varies everywhere about how voting systems operate. So the thing to kind of keep in mind here is that there are a few major vendors in the voting systems world, and all of their most recent voting equipment can actually do RCV elections. Now, they all have varying capabilities when it comes to doing RCV, but they can all at least design an RCV ballot and capture data from that ballot. So on these next few slides are some examples from a couple of different vendors used in Illinois. So we have Dominion's ballot on the left, and their ballots are limited to 10 rankings and a grid style ballot. Hart's built-in RCV ballot is here on the right. And of course, depending on the software version in use, Hart's ballots are limited to 5 or 6 rankings in a grid style ballot. So here we have some that are from Unison, which is a relatively small vendor. Unison ballots are limited to 3 rankings in a grid style ballot. So next we have a couple here from ES&S. So their ballots can be both grid style and column style as shown here. And of course, the number of rankings depends on the ballot layout, whether it's portrait or landscape, and of course, the number of contests on the page. So the ES&S ballot on the left is from Maine's elections in 2018. On the right is the ballot from Minneapolis's elections in 2017. So of course, as with all of these things I've covered so far, there's always more, right? And I'm just trying to kind of scratch the surface and kind of get the topic out in front of you all. This is a major part to get right with administering a RCV election, because the ability to use your voting system for RCV in an effective, efficient way will really ease the RCV implementation process. So another component to consider, of course, as I mentioned earlier, is results reporting. So let's go ahead and look at that. So here, actually displaying and releasing election results varies widely by jurisdiction. There's a lot of different visualizations that people have done. For example, the one shown here is a results display from Rcv, which is a RCV results visualization tool. And it was used to display the round by round results from the New York City Democratic primary for mayor. And it allows you to scroll between the round by round results. And of course, also through our work with the Center for Civic Design, as I mentioned earlier, best practices for results reporting, along with voter education and ballot design, were created and are available on our website. But even beyond visualizing those results, actually getting those results is a new, different thing to consider when implementing RCV. You need to figure out how you're going to get all the ballot data from your polling places, really from everywhere that people cast ballots, to one place to run your RCV count, because you need to centralize cast vote records or ballot data before running the round by round count. And of course, a cast vote record, or CVR, is the ballot by ballot digital record that's exported by a voting system of every ballot cast in an election. So in RCV elections, cast vote records note how every ballot marked every ranking available on that ballot. They are anonymous and cannot be traced back to any voter who cast a ballot included in the CVR file. And of course, CVRs are required to run the RCV round by round count with RCV counting software. Now, if CVRs are not available, RCV elections must be hand counted. So, kind of just keep in mind that these are all things to consider when implementing RCV elections, whether it's for the first time or for the 10th time. So that's the basics of election administration. And now I'm going to spend the rest of the presentation on Rcv Maps and discussing the Illinois assessment in particular. So Rcv Maps is a state-by-state analysis of the election administration infrastructure for each state, and it includes all 50 states plus DC. And we kind of wanted Rcv Maps to be a starting point. It's not the whole set of things that needs to be done, but it is meant to be the beginning of that conversation. So to create Rcv Maps, we searched and read through a lot of election code and election regulations in order to understand what state law did and did not require for each of the major sections of the analysis. We relied a lot on verified voting for the voting system portion of each assessment. And they have this fantastic tool called the verifier, and that, breaks down the voting system equipment used in every county or city in a state. There were a lot of rounds of revisions, and we also incorporated feedback from local organizations that we received, such as Fair Vote Illinois. And our plan is to update these assessments later this year, and then every 2 years after that. So this next cycle should include updating the voting system data and analysis and incorporating, like I said, additional feedback we receive. So of course, included in Rcv Maps, one of them, would be the Illinois assessment, which we're going to look at next. So here, the Illinois assessment was released back in 2021. And at that time, Illinois had voting equipment from 5 different vendors as shown here. Jurisdictions and voting systems are broken down into either RCV capable, RCV workarounds, or not RCV capable. Now, when we say RCV capable, we mean voting systems that either natively or after a software upgrade can design and capture RCV ballots and export a cast vote record that is compatible with at least one piece of RCV round by round counting software. Now keep in mind that RCV capable systems do not necessarily include software capable of tabulating the RCV round by round count. RCV workaround systems typically occur for jurisdictions that have both legacy, which is non-RCV capable, and modern RCV capable equipment. Legacy equipment meaning older voting equipment that is reaching the end of its usable lifespan. So for counties with RCV workarounds, we suggest either upgrading the non-RCV capable equipment or have RCV ballots scanned only by the RCV capable equipment they already own. If not, these counties could hand count their RCV contests. So not RCV capable means systems that were not designed to design or capture RCV ballots and cannot export ballot level cast vote records of those ballots. Not RCV capable systems can either be upgraded to RCV capable or replaced by hand counting RCV contests. So based on all that information and the verifier data at that time, 37% of jurisdictions were considered RCV capable. And of course, to determine the percentage of RCV capable jurisdictions in a state, you divide the number of RCV capable jurisdictions by the total jurisdictions in the state. So in this case, Illinois had 40 RCV capable out of 108 total, right? 102 counties with the 6 independent cities, and that equaled about 37%. So of course, for more information, please review the How We Score States Guide, which is linked here and also available on our website. Also, keep in mind that a list of all 108 Illinois jurisdictions are organized by voting system vendor and equipment used, and that can be found in the appendix of the Illinois assessment. So now that we kind of have a baseline established, let's spend some time on the more recent updates for Illinois. So now, since the Illinois assessment and Rcv Maps were released, Verified Voting released its 2022 verifier data. So recently we analyzed that data for Illinois in preparation for this presentation. So keep in mind, of course, Illinois uses the same 5 voting system vendors as before. And based on the 2022 verifier data, 13 more counties have RCV capable equipment and 26 counties had minor changes to voting equipment, which I'll discuss in more detail in a minute. So because of this increased, 13 counties having RCV capable equipment, Illinois is now at 49.1% RCV capable. So that means out of the 108 total jurisdictions, 53 jurisdictions are now RCV capable. So, as you can tell, substantial progress has been made. And, also we've heard that a few other jurisdictions are in the process or about to start that process of updating their equipment soon. So stay tuned. So let's go ahead and look a little bit at some of those updates that I mentioned. So as you can see here, out of the 13 counties that are now RCV capable, 9 of them changed voting system vendors. 3 counties each have either ES&S, HART, or Unison. The remaining 4 counties kept the same vendor, ES&S, but they removed their legacy non-RCV capable equipment. So like I mentioned before, RCV capable means voting systems that either natively or after a software upgrade can design and capture RCV ballots and export a cast vote record that is compatible with at least one piece of RCV round-by-round counting software. Keep in mind that RCV capable systems do not necessarily include software capable of tabulating the RCV round-by-round count. So out of the 26 counties with minor equipment changes, only 5 counties have improved categories from not RCV capable to now RCV workarounds, as listed here. So when I say minor changes, I mean, switching from one kind of accessible machine or equipment to another, or adding voting equipment that is in the same category as the county was before. So, as I mentioned earlier, RCV workarounds typically occur for jurisdictions that have both legacy and modern voting equipment. And of course, this is true for Illinois. These RCV workaround counties shown here use both legacy and newer ES&S equipment. So even though these counties have RCV capable equipment, it's used for absentee ballots only and not used in polling places, which is where the vast majority of voters cast ballots. So of course, we suggest that these counties either need to upgrade their non-RCV capable equipment or have their RCV ballots scanned only by RCV capable equipment they already have. And if not, counties could hand count their RCV contests, but that is tedious and time consuming process and is not recommended for larger jurisdictions. And the remaining 21 counties with minor equipment changes are not listed here, since those are still in their original category from the Illinois assessment. And of course, if interested, I can provide the more in-depth voting system data analysis as a resource after the presentation. So to kind of help visualize all that, what these voting system updates look like, overall, here's a comparison of the summary table from the 2020 verifier data, which was used in the Illinois assessment, and the summary table from the 2022 verifier data. I do want to note that there was an error in the Illinois assessment shown here in yellow. 2 jurisdictions with hard equipment were listed as RCV workarounds originally, but should have been listed as not RCV capable. So shown here is the corrected version. However, that change does not affect the RCV capable percent, which is still 37% at the time. So, excuse me, as you can see here in 2020, the number of RCV capable jurisdictions was 40, but in 2022, it's increased to 53. So the RCV workaround jurisdictions increased from 9 to 11, and the number of not RCV capable jurisdictions decreased from 59 to 44. So shown here on the left, you can see the increase in the percentage of RCV capable jurisdictions in Illinois. And of course, it's increased by about 12%. So before we end, I just kind of want to recap our findings. So here's what we've learned from the new 2022 data. So, more jurisdictions have RCV capable equipment. 13 more counties are now considered RCV capable. Many counties had minor changes to equipment. So out of those 26 counties total, 5 of them improved categories from not RCV capable to now RCV workarounds. Of course, Illinois is now 49.1% RCV capable, which is about 12% higher than last year when the assessment was released. Keep in mind that the jurisdictions in Illinois that are already RCV capable are in a good position to implement RCV locally. And these numbers may continue to improve in the future, since, as we said, some jurisdictions are in the process of updating their equipment, while a couple more are about to start that process soon. Now, again, we use the Verified Voting's verifier tool for voting system data to be consistent across all of the assessments. However, Fair Vote Illinois has been doing a great job with keeping more up-to-date contact with the counties, and they may be able to elaborate more on some of those future changes. So here's our contact information and our website again. Feel free to reach out. Thank you, of course, for your time and attention. We know this was a lot of information, but we really hope that this was really helpful. And of course, thanks for having us.
Thank you. Before we open it up and ask questions from the audience, Andrew, did you have anything that you wanted to comment on about what Melissa just said, or about what the senator mentioned?
Well, part of what I mentioned during when I spoke to was that, yeah, we love the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. They're incredible. And we try to support as much as we can. We're all collaborative in this. No one has an agenda other than getting ranked choice voting implemented because it makes a lot of sense. And so anything we could do to help Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, but more so what they do to help us, we really appreciate it. So not much else other than that, I think.
Okay, thank you. My first question is for Sam Stockstill, Chief Executive Officer for Senator Murphy. So for the primary, does ranked choice voting in this bill mean that people of all parties are on the same ballot? Would it eliminate separate ballots for separate parties? This apparently is what has been proposed in a book by Gell and Porter called The Politics Industry, that the top 5 nonpartisan primary winners would go in the ranked choice general election. How does this bill deal with that, Sam?
As far as I know, as far as this bill is written, we would still have separate primaries. Still a Republican and still a Democratic primary, but yeah, as you mentioned, each one would be included in that ranked choice system. Okay,
great. Does Andrew or Melissa, do you have any comments on the suggestion in the Gell and Porter book about trying this with a nonpartisan approach?
I'm going to let Chris have an opportunity to talk. I'm sure you guys have heard a lot from me right now. I'm just going to pass it off to my colleague, Chris, if he has anything he'd like to add.
I personally have a lot of opinions about it, but professionally, I have very few opinions about it. So I think I'm happy to talk about that offline. I think the other thing to consider too is relating to your first question, Jean, is both New York City and Maine use ranked choice voting in separate partisan primaries, like the Illinois bill proposes. The other state, Alaska, which Andrew mentioned, that has adopted ranked choice voting at the state level, uses a top 4 system, like you were describing, that Gale and Porter have recommended. So there's a bit of both, and I'm personally very curious to see how that primary works in Alaska, because they're implementing it for the first time this year. That Alaska is the primary, the top 4 primary is in August, and the ranked choice portion, which is just for the general election, will of course be in November.
Thank you. Tricia, do you have a question?
I have a few questions here. The first one is, if ballots can be accepted after an election, such as absentee ballots coming through the mail, resolving challenge ballots, et cetera, doesn't this delay the ranking process? And maybe Andrew?
Sure. Potentially, yes, right? It potentially could delay the ranking process. And there are some subtleties that Chris and Melissa are free to jump in on, where depending on the implementation, you might say we have sort of batch elimination versus single voter elimination. But as we get results in, you could still do sort of a preliminary count, assuming you have enough ballots. But in close elections, yeah, it could delay it. We might need to wait until we have enough ballots in. One thing to note on that, as we probably will see more delays with election results anyways, as we use more and more mail-in and absentee voting. So even in the system we use today, at close elections, we need to wait till we could count all the votes. And so it'll be more likely to have delays with ranked choice voting. And potentially that's one of the very few, if you consider it a negative, that I could think of ranked choice voting, is it might take a little bit longer to get the results, if that's what you're after, is a quick answer. I'll throw it to Melissa and Chris as well.
I mean, obviously some of that has to do with state law and what's already written there in the code. But I will say, like with San Francisco, they do release, and Chris of course can add in, but they release their preliminary, meaning their first choice votes, and then they have like kind of a system set up of how often that they update. And so they release like several different preliminary rounds before they get to the point of official results. And like I said, Chris may know some more things on that, but that's the general. And I mean, I've seen those results and how they've changed and how often they release it. But of course, that's what they do. And that's, not what all jurisdictions do, because here again, they do what they already use in practice.
Okay, I have another question. And this one is the question or would like to know more about the RCV Resource Center. Is it a private organization? How is it funded? That kind of thing.
We're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we rely on grant funding and funding from and donations from individuals or other publicly supported organizations.
Yeah, I might just mention that I visited the site, and you have information such as your tax returns online, so that you can see who it is who is funding your site.
Yeah, we try to be, because it's elections, we want to be really transparent about whose money is going where.
Yeah.
So I have a question here. If home rule is required for ranked choice voting at the local level, what about county board elections that aren't home rule but have a big impact, particularly in rural areas?
And I could take that. Our understanding is that county levels would be able to implement it as well, although I would look into it a little bit further, right? So that is our interpretation of the law from our policy director who looked into it. And that's what we believe. We haven't tried at the county level yet to, or had enough interest where we went further down the line to see what it would take. But we believe counties could implement it as well. Definitely municipalities with home rule, it would require a referendum, which I mentioned very briefly. So either city council putting the referendum on the ballot, or the citizens collect signatures to get it on the ballot.
I have some more questions, Jean.
Great.
One questioner asked whether the city of Rockford has RCV capable equipment. And so I'm sure, Melissa, you either have it on list or you could tell us how to find it.
I do. Let me bring that up. That's a little bit more into detail than I was covered in the presentation, but I
What county
definitely
is
have
Rockford?
that.
Winnebago
Well,
County.
Independent. Isn't it Independent City?
Oh, it's independent. Oh, okay, yeah.
I'm pretty sure. I think Fairville, Illinois had mentioned that that might be interested in updating their equipment. But let me see if I can bring up what they are. May have to come back to me.
Okay, I have another question. Do the current bills in the General Assembly include both primaries and general elections?
Yes, Sam answered that in the chat. Thank you. Yes, indeed, it does. It does. So there are some questions about could it be problematic under these circumstances? So does it, for instance, increase generally the number of candidates running for a particular office? Could that lead to more voter confusion? Andrew, why don't you take that one?
I guess we're seeing that more candidates do run for office in many elections. We still in Illinois would have separate primary and separate generals. So we'd have an election in the primaries, then the general. You would have a candidate for each of the parties that runs in the general. So in the general election, we wouldn't anticipate a large increase. In the primary, perhaps, but we already deal with large primaries sometimes as well, as we saw in the last couple presidential elections. So we don't have a strong opinion of how that would impact things, other than it's still a problem that we have today.
Thank you. What about in multi-winner races like school boards and commissioners? Are there problems or advantages of using ranked choice voting in that situation?
Yep. So our belief is that ranked choice voting is what makes multi-member or multi-seat, multi-winner elections really meaningful, where you actually get the best representation. And so it's also sometimes referred to as single transferable vote, where you rank your choices just like you do today. And there's a counting process that's a little bit more involved, because if one candidate receives over what they need, more votes than they actually need to be elected as one of the peoples in the office, some of their votes get transferred to the second choices, some percentage to the second choice votes of the people who voted for them. So we see it as a real powerful way to get the best representation. Fair Vote National, their big push is for the Fair Representation Act, which would convert U.S. House districts to multi-member districts and use proportional ranked choice voting to select multiple candidates within these multi-member districts.
Thank you.
Melissa has the information about Rockford, so you want to give us that?
Yes. So of course, City of Rockford is a independent election jurisdiction, and they currently have ES&S, DS200s, and Express Vote. So they fall under the category RCV capable.
Mm-hmm. And I note that in the chat, Chris has has answered that you can find jurisdiction level information about voting systems in the appendix of the individual state assessments, and he gives a link to a website, or you can a link to the website of the Illinois assessment. So
thank
the
you,
information is there online.
Yeah. Another question is has it been used for topics that voters want legislators to prioritize, not just for candidates? Have you ever heard of that use?
Ranked choice voting is used by lots of places. I haven't used for prioritizing topics. Within Fair Vote Illinois, we use it to vote for lots of things. You could use it to say which restaurant are we going to, where there's multiple choices, and You want to find the most preferred amongst a group. It's used in areas like the Baseball Hall of Fame voting and for the Oscars in part. So it's used in lots of different places besides just politics, because it just makes sense to get the most preferred choice. But I have not heard of it being used to prioritize topics. Not in that way. Not at least at the state level.
So Cambridge, Massachusetts uses proportional ranked choice voting, the multi-winner form that Andrew was just talking about. They also use ranked choice voting for their participatory budgeting process, which is when they're asking for citizen input on a few different budget items that could go in front of the council that the council was trying to decide between. And they use ranked choice voting to determine what is the two most popular budgetary ideas. So that it's been used in that context, but like Andrew, I've not heard of it being used sort of internally in party caucuses to decide among issues they're working on.
We've heard a lot of pros and cons. Is there anything that we haven't heard about what naysayers would say the downsides of ranked choice voting are?
I would say the most common thing that we hear is more of a myth, which is that ranked choice voting is too complicated and voters won't understand it. That's by far the most common thing we hear, but we see it over and over again that that's just not the case, that voters find it easy to use. The incident rates of improperly marked ballots are about the same, especially when I think Melissa and Chris could probably comment more to that, probably particularly when we use good ballot design. And so we're seeing that's the most common thing we hear, and it's more of a myth though.
Yeah, I'd like to add too, this is kind of a myth as well, which we added, that some low income and minority voters might not participate at a higher rate. We've kind of seen studies on both sides that show it might encourage, but with how spread out this practice has been state by state, city by city, it's hard to get an accurate depiction of if this actually encourages voting in that segment block or if it might discourage. I tend to follow in the former, that I think it encourages voters because they'll have kind of a little bit more motivation or new motivation to go to the polls. And then also voting equipment was another one, which, sometimes it doesn't seem like machines will change a whole lot, but the ballot will change a little bit. There'll be a different printing process, but other than that, that shouldn't really be, an outrageous cost or a cost that would deter it from being implemented.
I kind of want to add a little bit of what Andrew was saying. With for example, New York City, there was a post-election exit poll that was with Rank the Vote NYC, and I think Edison Research. I got to check the other one, but Edison Research, and their data found that NYC overwhelmingly majorities in favor of RCV. Based off their data, it says 95% say RCV is simple to use. So there are post-election surveys that those results kind of it disproves that. So there is information out there. So kind of making that known. And there are some others as well. It's just that's the one I can recall off the top of my head. But we can send out a link or something like that for anyone interested in seeing some of that information.
Thank you. Tricia, do you have questions?
No, although I sent a chat note to Melissa Hall if she could look at that.
Okay. One question that we got is how often would we expect final candidate selection to actually be different due to ranked choice voting as compared to the majority system we're accustomed to?
I could take that one too, because we looked into this because we want to know how frequently do we have a ranked choice voting election where the candidate that receives the most first round votes is not the winner. And that happens depending on that. I guess you could count it in two ways. Is there an outright winner where not more than one round is needed, or elections where multiple rounds are needed? And in the first case, it's only about 4% of the time does the first round winner not win the election. And in cases where we're looking at multiple rounds of voting, it goes up to 9%. So in both cases, most of the time, the first round voter, whoever wins with the most first round votes does in fact win. So we see this as a very positive thing. It's not like the whole election system is going to be turned upside down and on its head. It's going to change some of the incentives, and it's going to allow more people to run and people to vote for who they like. And over time, we'll see how that shifts the discussion of issues and how voting plays out longer term. But in the short term, yes, the majority of cases would still elect the same person, which is great. It's all those edge cases which happen, still happen often enough where it's great to make sure the most preferred candidate is elected.
Thank you. Sam, we're so glad that you've got your camera working now. Was there anything that you wanted to add about the bill or comments you wanted to make relative to what you've been hearing today?
I think we covered everything that I have, but I'd be happy to. I'm not sure if everyone received it, but I'll put the Senate Majority Staff Bill analysis in our chat box. I think I also have a link to a PowerPoint, but it kind of covered all the details that we mentioned in this meeting already. But if any of you would like to utilize those resources, I'll go ahead and put them in the chat box for you.
Thank you very much appreciated. So we have another question is, what is the average cost for jurisdictions to upgrade their systems as needed? Whether they need a new machine or software? That's for Chris and Melissa.
I'll talk a bit about this. It's a bit of a wishy-washy answer. It's really hard to define what costs look like for voting systems because the voting systems market is painfully opaque. Like the information about how much stuff costs just isn't made available. What we do know is that a single precinct scanner tends to cost about $5,500. So, it depends on the size of your jurisdiction. The smaller the jurisdiction, the fewer of those scanners you'll need, the less money you'll need to spend upgrading hardware. If you're in a larger jurisdiction, you need to buy a lot of new scanners, you'll spend more. About $5,500 per scanner you have to buy. And that all depends on how a jurisdiction deploys those scanners. How many scanners do they like to have out per the number of voters in a given precinct? The other things, the software upgrade stuff, again, it varies a lot. We've seen election voting system vendors charge as little as $0 for ranked choice voting software upgrades because it was part of a whole package of an upgrade a county was buying, to as much to hundreds of thousands of dollars because it was a rich jurisdiction that the voting system vendor knew that county could afford. So it's a big variety just because the way the voting system market operates, the vendors sort of charge what they want. And I guess I should add to all of the, like Melissa was saying during her presentation, all the counties that we've categorized as not RCV capable or RCV workarounds in Illinois are counties using legacy voting equipment. They're all counties that need to be replacing their equipment and would need to replace it if they were going to use ranked choice voting or not. And luckily, any new voting system they use will have some amount of ranked choice voting capability. It will at least be able to capture ranked choice voting ballots, design those ballots for voters. So any upgrade a county is making will make them more ready to potentially implement ranked choice voting in Illinois.
Thank you. Tricia, do you have any remaining questions?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, then we really appreciate our panelists being with us today. Did any of you want to make any final comments?
Just a general thank you for hosting this session. This is really incredible. This is really what we think is needed, just public engagement, discussion. So yeah, thank you for hosting.
And thank you to our league members and friends of league for staying engaged and informed. You're welcome to join the league's election Google group for updates about this and other legislation regarding election policy. Just contact issues@lwvil.org. And now, please stick around for a couple things. We'll have a very brief poll, and then we're going to try something new. We're going to, for anyone who would like to stick around later, we're going to unmute you if you raise your hand, and we'll let you share chats with each other. So chatting will be open to everyone. And if you would like to speak to the group about whatever's on your mind, then you're welcome to raise your hand under reactions. We do not expect our speakers to stick around for this, but they're welcome to. Thank you again to everybody.
Okay, and we'll show the poll after we stop the recording, which I'm going to do.